The virtual CISO moment is brought to you by vCISO Services, a leading provider of quality and experienced virtual chief information security officers for small and mid-sized businesses. Check them out at vcisoservices.com. Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the virtual CISO moment. Aaron Robel joins us today. He is the VP of Information Security and CISO for WSECU. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, happy to be here. I
It's
love your look today, by the way. It looks fantastic.
Well, and of course, you're kind of used to this because, and I know we talked about this before the podcast began, but we've known each other for some time. Initially, starting with our associations with the FSISAC in the financial services world, and then for a while we worked together in our little firm, vCISO Services, where you were doing some consultant work with us. So appreciate all that. So it's kind of like cool to see you again. It's been a few months. You're looking good.
It's been a while since we had an opportunity to catch up. So, yeah, it's awesome.
So tell me about your cyber story. How did you and why did you first get into cybersecurity? Because it's not like little kids starting to they're growing up. It's like they think about they want to be firemen or policemen or whatever, or astronauts. But not many people want to say I want to be a cyber person. Why did you get involved with it? How did you get involved? And lead us all the way up to what you're doing now for the credit union.
Sure, and I'll try to be as brief as I can. I could give you the whole backstory going back to when I was a kid, and all that. But I did grow up in a very technology-forward household. So I have two other brothers, and all of us are in technology. So it probably stemmed from there. But I don't know. It's been over 20 years since I've, gotten into the industry. And I started with, I think I was just on that track for security because of where I started. I started on the help desk at WatchGuard Technologies, which is a firewall manufacturer in Seattle, Washington. And so through that, I learned, we used firewalls for everything to keep costs down. So I automatically just jumped into the field of security, just being at that organization. And then it stemmed from there. I went to the state after WatchGuard, and I worked for the state's chief information security officer, grew there into a management role. As I started out as a security engineer, then tech lead for all of the perimeter security, then moved up to architect, and then moved up to managing the infrastructure team that I started on. And then after that, I saw this opportunity with WSECU to build a program. I had to take a step back from my leadership role. But I saw the opportunities in the future. And so I went to WSECU, and I've been there ever since. Started out as the senior security engineer. And then in 15 or 16, I had the opportunity to take on kind of the CISO role as the vice president of information security. And that's what I still am today.
So we have a similar path in some respects, in that we were both in government for a while and then migrated to financial services. I'm curious, as when you made that migration to financial services, obviously FIs are financial institutions, heavily regulated industry. What sort of challenges did you find with that movement?
So I would say the tougher move for me was going from kind of a small scale technology manufacturing company to the state where it was heavily regulated. That move was like, I got my face blown off when I started at that job, with all the regulations and the politics and all of that in state government that naturally occur. And then I think it was a little bit easier move and transition from government, where I had gotten used to all of the regulations and all of that, and then moved to the financial sector and the credit union industry, where that kind of stuff was, the norm. But every one of them, it's a different side of the same coin, I would say, as far as how regulations are different between the state and the financial industry or healthcare industry or any of the industries. They all kind of are just different shades of that same look and feel.
Well, and certainly regulatory pressures, requirements, however you want to call it, that could be one challenge for the any size financial institution. Um, uh, but WSECU,
I know it's a
excuse
bit of a
me.
mouthful. Yeah, WS.
Um, that would be considered a small to mid-sized, like a community institution, right?
Yeah, we are. Let's see. We tripped over 4 billion in assets. I think we're going to be at a 4.5 years shortly. So kind of larger in the credit union space, but overall for financial institutions, definitely in the small to medium size financial organization.
And I guess I should kind of backpedal for a moment. I did mention an acronym, and I know we have so many acronyms in our field, but I mentioned the acronym FSISAC, and there may not be
Oh, yeah.
folks that understand what FSISAC is, or FS-ISAC. That is the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. It was one of the earlier what they call ISACs, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is a methodology really for verticals to exchange information. And you're involved with FSISEC to this day, right?
Yeah, no, that was the first. So when I moved over from the state, that was because at the state we were part of the MS-ISAC, the multi-state
Yes.
ISAC, and so I had a lot of experience at the state with the ISACs and the value of sharing and all of that it brought to the table. And so when I became when I came on at WSECU, that was one of the first things I did. So that was like 2013. We became members of the FSISAC, and yeah, we've been members ever since.
And you joined the Community Institution Council. That one of the co-directors there was a pretty cool person, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, yeah. That's where I got introduced, at least virtually, to Greg, and before he made the transition into this kind of stuff.
I used to joke that I used to collect ISACs because, yeah, before FS, I was MS because I was CISO for Metro Nashville Davidson
Yeah,
County. So multi-state also has local governments as far as members. And then prior to that, part of the REN ISAC, which is the Research and Educational Network, I believe is what REN stands for. So, but haven't really joined any since then. So but one of the things I know when I made the transition, and I wasn't in government nearly as long as you, at least the local government, I was there only for about a year and a half, and so it was probably more of a shock for me going to the banking industry. Of course, banking and credit unions, people they equate them, but there are some differences. But a majority of the issues that you find are going to be similar. Would you agree with that?
yeah, definitely. I mean, the regulations are a bit different between the FDIC and the NCUA, but as far as what we all share together, like you're talking about the KIC or the Community Institutions Council with the FSISAC, we are all battling the same battles and fights as far as our size, what we can do, the programs we run, all of those things are very similar.
So, what would you think that right now, just thinking about the credit union space and the threat landscape out there, what would you think is a very significant information security, cybersecurity threat to credit unions right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everybody's talking about ransomware and that evolution, but I think that what I've seen more recently, especially for growing institutions, is that if you don't look at your whole program and make sure that everything is keeping pace with the complexity of, say, your technology or digital space, some things can get left behind. And one of those that I feel like is getting left behind across a lot of my peers and in a lot of those areas as organizations grow is vendor management. And a big part of that is the risk. Ransomware risk is prevalent in your vendor community, just like it is for us. And no matter how strong your program is, if you have a weak vendor out there that you're sharing your confidential information with, that's where the weak link in the chain is. So it's not sexy and glamorous because it's all contracts and SLAs and all of that due diligence and due care that you have to do against those vendors. But that's where I've seen a lot of the kind of more recent impacting incidents and breaches in financial industry has been coming from those third parties. And also our industry is moving more towards using partners and vendors and whatever the SaaS solutions are that we're pivoting to, or information or infrastructure as a service. All of those things are putting added pressure on vendor management, but I see that being lagging in a lot of organizations. And so that's where I see one of the biggest risks in our industry right now.
That is very interesting that you say that, because as you were talking, I had one of those memories from when I started with a CISO for the bank, that that was actually the most mature vertical, it seemed like at the time, as far as vendor management. Other folks didn't really um, pay much diligence. It seemed like, at least as much as they should have. It was very hard for folks in other areas to know what at that time was a SAS 70, or that became a SOC 1. And of course, we have the SOC 2s now. We've had the SOC 2s for what, 12, 13 years now. Um, so to hear that it's still a struggle in financial services is interesting, because I would extrapolate that to say that probably in other verticals it is even more of a struggle. At the very least, that's one of the things I've seen through our
Mhm.
little firm, working for folks. Um, but you also mentioned a an interesting. I won't say it's something new, but it certainly has accelerated over the years, and that is the offloading of some of the tactical review aspects to SaaS providers. Um, do you see do you see that as potentially being a positive, a negative, or a mix of that? And I've got a follow up as to the reason why I'm asking that.
Oh, well, I think that I look at our own organization, and in some ways we've held off on adoption of things like Office 365 and all of that, because we really are good about what is the actual ROI that we want to see. And we hadn't seen that in our reviews of going that direction. And I think that paradigm has shifted to where moving to those SaaS providers is a lot of value. And most of them have come up to par where their security programs are in many ways better than our own in the smaller industry, because they have a lot more resources they can apply to it. And so from that perspective, I think there's been this shift to where it just doesn't make sense to have a lot of these typical enterprise workloads and business support capabilities on-prem anymore. They've matured to the point where now the operational overhead is higher if you manage it on-prem than if you just offload it to that vendor. And then you have your resources can pivot to more higher value areas within your program. And I'm even doing it within our own security program, where we just last year adopted a cloud-based SIM provider, so that I can take my security analyst and have him focus on higher value areas within our program, whether that's automation,
Right.
testing our controls, all of those things, rather than just watching the wire and responding to alerts. So I think that's what more and more people are starting to see, with the value of going those directions and offloading some of that lower value work, so that they can focus on what's going to bring value to their membership or what's going to bring value to the business.
And the more that you do that, the more now you have to put an emphasis on vendor management. And as you mentioned before, there are organizations that help with that. Um, do you see? And I don't want to name any, but
Yeah,
you know what
sure.
I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Do you see that as being generally a positive, or are there some negatives associated with that?
Yeah, I mean, we went down the whole. We have a SaaS GRC solution that we use, and
Hmm.
we've had it for 5 or 6 years, and we thought that moving from spreadsheets to that solution was going to be the game changer for how we manage vendors and how we manage our risk management program and all of these things. And I would say that I think there's pros and cons to that, and every solution we've looked at has negatives and challenges. But at the same time, there is some of those automation capabilities that move beyond what we were able to do, when it was like spreadsheets, that kind of thing. So I think that it's a necessary evil to move to, as far as one of those kind of GRC programs to help manage vendors, because you can build workflows, you can build automation. And so hopefully you're reducing the resource load on maybe your contract administrator to go out and knock on doors to make sure that your contract owners are doing their due diligence, and that kind of thing. So I think from that perspective, it's brought some value. But at the end of the day, sometimes there's added complexity to that value, where a spreadsheet's a lot simpler to use.
Well, and you have also with vendor management, one of the key components, and there are folks that will say that this is good, this is bad, this is indifferent, that's too much relied upon. But review of those third party audits, which more likely than not, at least here in the United States, are going to be a SOC 2. But
Mhm.
financial services for some providers, they undergo examinations, for example, and you can get like the exams from the regulators and all of that, and follow very specific process. But as far as like vendor due diligence with doing a vendor review in a SOC 2, um, I would have often been of the opinion that the the company needs to be more involved with performing the SOC 2 review, because they can understand not only what the service is doing for them, but they also understand some of the risks. And a lot of times people don't understand the concept of the complementary user entity controls, which they don't miss. And so and I this could just be a simple you agree or disagree or have additional input, but sometimes I see
Me,
that
I
these
always have additional input, Greg.
I'm counting on it. Um, Sometimes I think these vendor management as a service providers, they'll go and they'll review like SOC 2s and they'll come back with a report and say everything's all right.
Yeah,
But
sorry. I think that when you talk about some of those vendors that are providing that additional third party service review, a lot of times what I've seen in that is it's simply a check the box,
right,
and isn't because they don't know our business, right? So they
right.
don't know what the risks are to our business, and so you do need to have, somebody who's knowledgeable about risk and knowledgeable about your own business performing those due care tasks and things. We have not gone down that path, so. While we have the SaaS GRC, they have those bundled services. We haven't gone down the path of leveraging their reviews of those, like a SOC 2 or that kind of thing.
Well, I remember that even back in the day when I was um, CISO for a bank, I really tried to get the business units involved with
Mm-hmm.
the process of at least look at the SOC 2. And sometimes I with me, not I wasn't offloading. It was like, well, first of all, and I really need to know this, does this SOC 2 cover the
Yeah.
service that you're subscribed to? Because you know as well as I do that sometimes there are SOC 2s that companies have done, but it's for a portion of their service or offering. And I think that, again, I think you're right. And I think this is the true risk here. And then this is why I'm kind of pinging on this, because I think vendor management in general for small and mid-sized businesses is a bigger risk than people realize, because I think that they're migrating it in their mind towards a check the box and really creating more gaps there.
Well, and I think that they're also thinking they're transferring the risk to the vendor, and they're not.
Exactly. You cannot offload the responsibility of maintaining confidentiality of your information, no matter what you do.
Yeah, no matter what. I mean, you could write the best contract in the world and have all the great SLAs, but when the breach at that vendor occurs, you are still held accountable to your customer or your members or whatever. And
Hmm.
it's your reputation that's being damaged. And regardless if you can go and even get, um, through insurance and everything, you can cover your real costs. There is that damage that's done. And so you need to still make sure that you're doing due diligence and due care. And the other thing I would say is that a lot of programs that I see out there are good about onboarding the vendor and getting all the data and even going through, beyond the SOC 2, where you're doing an additional assessment, as you know, Greg, with some of your clients, that becomes almost its own beat your head against the wall with every CISO trying to figure out how to trip you up with
Yeah.
their own assessments and things. So that's all great. But what happens after you've onboarded that vendor? And that's where a lot of that continuous monitoring and care to ensure that that vendor still continues to meet your expectations is in place with the vendor management program. And that's where you don't necessarily have the resources to do something like that in a small to medium sized enterprise. So sometimes it's really great. We're really great about onboarding that new vendor because it's a new shiny thing. We can put them through the process, but then once they're in the system, it's like then we forget about it. And we really need to think about that ongoing care of that vendor and making sure that they still continue to have their SOC 2, and we're still reviewing that SOC 2. It's not just we got the new one, check the box, move on with our day. So that's another big area I've seen in the vendor management space that gets forgotten about. Along with the second one I've seen is where a lot of people put in a new GRC, and they're really good about all the new vendors coming on board. But what about that one you signed the contract for back in 2010? Those kind of get grandfathered in and we forget about them. And that's another area I think, that is challenging from a resource perspective to review all, take your good rigorous process now and then apply it to all those old vendors, maybe your core vendor that you're using from a financial perspective that's been in place for 20 years. They still need to go through that same rigor and make sure you have eyes wide open on where there's gaps in their program potentially.
Yeah, and a big chunk of that has to start with too understanding where your information is and how it's flowing and how it's protected. And yeah, and you brought up a good point about the small mid-size organizations that it's sometimes difficult for them to kind of get a handle on this, which I would then say that, hey, that's what a virtual CISO can help with. So thank you for lobbing that softball. I really
Yeah,
appreciate that.
I'm here for you, Greg.
So all this stuff with the concerns of cyber, and certainly there's I would say that in some ways there's maybe not more, but there's certainly a different element of stress when it comes to financial services. Prepping for an exam, a financial service regulatory exam, is unlike what you would see in a lot of other areas, particularly those who have never had to deal with a regulatory exam. A lot of stress involved sometimes, and you can't be stressed out 24/7 by 365. What's one of the things that you do here's your softball. What's one of the things that you do to help decompress from all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very passionate about what I do, and I take I take a lot of personal responsibility and personal ownership in the security program at WSECU. And so sometimes it's difficult because of the stress that brings on. So one thing that I am doing long term is I'm trying to retire early, so that we'll see if that ever pencils out. But I'm hoping to ripcord out of the industry before the stress eats me alive. So there's that. But as far as the ongoing thing, I've always been an alpine mountaineer. So that's been my thing for many, many years until last year when I really screwed up my shoulders out sailing. So I screwed up my shoulders. And so the alpine climbing thing may or may not be something I can continue. So this year I'm changing up the game. I'm trying something new. I'm doing obstacle course racing this year. I have like seven races lined up that I'm going to be doing. The first one is this weekend down in Portland, Oregon. A 5K obstacle course race called the Muddy Valentine that I'll be participating in. So it's not just those races, but it's one, I always like to sign up for things to hold myself accountable to all of the preparatory things I need to do with my diet, exercise, all of those things. And the accountability is that race in the future. And so all of that whole process, whether it's me documenting it in my spreadsheet of what I've done, tracking everything on all of my devices. I have like 3 different devices now that I'm tracking all my data on for all this stuff. So it's all of that takes my mind off of the stress at work.
Yeah.
And it, this year it's OCR or obstacle course racing. Next year it could be something else. Who knows?
Well, I kind of joked that was going to be a softball question because I knew how you would answer it. We've talked about the importance of physical activity, physical fitness, good nutrition. Really, it's not just words. One of the things, and
We could
I'm
do a
going to
whole
get on.
podcast on that, Greg.
I could. I'm going to get on my soapbox just for a quick second and say that there are a lot of folks out there that they joke in the security field that that their decompress is they drink. You go to conferences and it's the first thing you have afterwards. And it's like, no, wait a minute. Well, I'd like to see a conference where instead of them opening up the bar afterwards, why don't we all collectively do a run or something or a walk or something like that? I mean, you can still.
Yeah, no, I love that idea.
Have some sort of a camaraderie and have a vendor sponsor it or something. I mean, vCISO will sponsor a 5K during RSA. I'm just putting that out there right now. If you want to do it, well, it depends on how much you're going to charge us. But no, I think that's great. And I've always wanted to try to do those obstacle runs. And I've obviously talked about running before, and I just maybe one of these days. But I want to enjoy my retirement too. So my advice to you is don't burn yourself out either way, whether it be like in the job or, physically.
Yeah.
Enjoy the retirement. I tell people that the reason why I do my functional workout right now, I know I mentioned this to you before, is so that when I'm 85, I can get off the toilet by
Yeah,
myself.
that's my whole goal too. Although at
Yep.
sometimes because everything I do 110%.
Hmm.
Sometimes I worry about just that, like overdoing it on the way that I exercise, leading to more problems when I'm 85 because of me trying to be healthy now and then hurting my shoulders as a prime example of that, blowing out my knee playing basketball, a few years ago. So there's that balance, and sometimes I don't do a good job of striking balance in the exercise stuff because I
Well,
always have some kind of crazy goal that I'm after.
core may be a four-letter word, but core is so important because core is what makes the world go round. So, well, what future plans do you have? I know you talked about that eventually you want to retire so that you can enjoy a nice quality of life retirement early. You on track for that, or you have other plans?
Yeah, no, I am on track for that. Depending on, the markets are always fickle. But as far as where I'm going, I don't know. I've done a lot of reflection over the last year or so, and definitely I've been fortunate where I'm at with the scenario that played out for me at WSCCU and everything that's been built there and the team that's there and the program that's been built. So I love having the autonomy to build and fix things. So I'm always on the lookout on for where that is, whether that's within WSCCU or not. I'm just passionate about whatever I do, whether that's leadership or fixing broken things. And so I don't know where it's going to lead to, but I do enjoy the process, and I've enjoyed it so far.
Don't know where I'm going, but I sure know where I've been.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure catching up with you. I always enjoy it. It's been too long. Hope that we have a conversation again sooner than 6 months since
Yes,
the last time we talked. So,
definitely. Well, thank you, Greg. This was a fun. It always is. And again, I just have to call out the whole thing you got going on there. I love the hat and all of the atmosphere that you've created there. It's fantastic. Love it.
well, it looks like a junk store, but it works. So, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And everybody, stay secure.